why should I, as a consumer, have different expectations from my digital banking or my insurance company as compared to when I shop, say, e-commerce, right? Search, for example. If you're used to doing search online, you pretty much know what to look for, how to look for, etc. But imagine now you go to a different site where search does not behave the way you expect it to behave. Now that's a relearning process for you. And the point is, why would you want the customer to go through that? So if I have a great store experience at a Whole Foods or at a Trader Joe's or at Kohl's, I will now expect a similar great experience at any other store environment that I go to. Why should that be any different?
Welcome to LaunchPod, the show from LogRocket, where we sit down with top product and digital leaders. How do you redesign the most visited e-commerce webpage in the world? Rahul Chaudhari helped reshape the Amazon homepage during his years as a product leader there before becoming VP of Product and Technology at Kohl's. In this episode, Rahul shares Amazon's customer backwards approach and how he used it to unlock $500 million of value on the Amazon homepage, the secret to product adoption, leverage existing customer habits to unlock new opportunities, and how Amazon and Google raised the bar for digital experiences so high that now every other product pays the price. So here's our episode with Rahul Chaudhari. All right, Rahul, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. Between, Kohl's, Amazon, you've got almost the last decade covered pretty strongly in retail, and then Airtel, HSBC before that. You've been all over the place. I do want to talk to you kind of about how you think about product and how this depth of different kind of industries has played in. But maybe first, before that, let's just go all the way back. Do you want to give us just the 90-second TLDR on how did you end up here and how did you get into product and that kind of piece?
Absolutely. I actually did not start in product. I started in marketing.
Yeah.
I was very excited, really drawn to consumers and brand building and marketing. And that's where I started. I cut my teeth in that. I worked in a CPG company building brands. I used to handle a biscuits brand back in India and a company called Britannia, which was part of or sort of associated with Danone group back then. And then my curiosity then took me to more P&L roles because I wanted to also grow as a business leader, connect the dots to marketing and brand building to the business impact. And I did some P&L roles in telecom in a company called Airtel, which was the largest telecom company in India at that point of time, the fourth largest in terms of the subscribers. So it's a fairly big portfolio in that sense. And those were sort of P&L growth roles before, formally they were called growth roles in that sense. Yeah. And then I joined Amazon in 2015. And that journey took me to, building products and leveraging technology to sort of, scale product. I had done product in a CPG and a telecom world before, but, product in the true sense of software and digital is really where I cut my teeth at Amazon. So in that sense, where I've sort of grown and have my impact is at that trifecta of marketing, of business P&L and product in that sense.
If you look at where product is going right now, you kind of have to have the knowledge across all three, maybe not, as deeply as you went where you had senior roles and all these things,
right?
But you at least have to understand them, or else, I think we're very quickly with AI and how fast things move and just the furthering of agency going to run into the have and have nots there, where some people understand these things, understand go to market and how to distribute and how to think about, the ledger and profit and loss and the financial aspect, or you're just like a feature kind of person. That's probably be exponentially less important.
Absolutely. And the way I look at it is, you've got to understand for any problem that you're dealing with, right? And the way I started is this desirable from a customer perspective, right? And that's where I really start and begin every problem or every idea that I have. Then I look at, is this really viable from a business perspective? Does it make sense? And then you look at the technical feasibility of it. And that's where my product and technology understanding comes into play. And the question that I started asking myself now is, why now, right? After all of this, and why now could have different nuances to it. One nuance could be, this makes sense to prioritize right now in my roadmap, and therefore why now? But it could also have some tailwinds, which make it much more sort of ideal to do this now versus having done it earlier or doing it later. And that's really the lens I've tried to apply across my conversations.
One thing you said that I had seen written and I thought was really interesting was kind of the concept, and I think you'd be hard pressed to think of this without spanning at least marketing and product. Is this concept of regardless of if it's your digital banking experience or Amazon or anything like that,
right?
They're the same customer. So why do we expect people to put up with a mid experience in
Yeah.
maybe on your banking app and expect perfection from Amazon. It's the same person. They know what great is.
Exactly, exactly. And I'll give you an example, right? Just a few weeks back, I was trying to bundle my insurance. So I had auto insurance with company A, I had my home insurance with company B, I had my landlord insurance with company C. And it was, becoming crazy to sort of keep track of everything. Obviously, I bought those insurances at different points of time, but it made sense to bundle them, maybe even co-term them so that, tracking that becomes easier. It's one place, it's one app on my phone versus having to do this in 10 different places, 4 different apps, that kind of stuff, right? But that journey itself was a little bit of a pain from a consumer angle, at least, right? So, for example, here is what is broken for me, right? One was the intent was very clear on my end. Like I very specifically said, this is what I want to do. These are my policies. I want to change some terms. I want to co-term them. But there was a very clear coordination miss, right? This was not an underwriting edge case at all. One example, right? So if you go to different marketplaces and want to buy insurance or bundle insurance, I found they only allow you to bundle one auto and one home. But what if I want to bundle more than two, right? I have at least had 3 insurance requirements. I wanted to add an umbrella cover on top of that, but the initial bundling requirements wouldn't allow me to do that. And that then spun into a conversation where I had to now speak with every company. Some companies require me to go through an agent. Even when I started my discovery online, the agent conversation was back and forth over emails, over Slack, over messages. It took me almost a month to get this done, right?
And you're not a digitally unsavvy person. It's not.
Exactly. Yeah. And my sort of experience there, both from a consumer, but also as a product thinker here is, why should I as a consumer have different expectations from my digital banking or my insurance company or my app on the, fitness, place I go to as compared to when I shop, say, e-commerce, right? Ultimately, when I start shopping or start sort of discovering a certain level of experience, I start building those habits, right?
Mhm.
Now, if you're going to force a customer to build different habits and through different experience, re-educate them, that adds a tremendous amount of friction. Take search, for example, right? Now, if you're used to doing search online, you pretty much know what to look for, how to look for, etc. But imagine now you go to a different site where search does not behave the way you expect it to behave. Now, that's a relearning process for you. And the point is, why would you want the customer to go through that? Because the same customer another day, right? Customer has similar expectations and their bar is raised similarly from one level to the other. So if I have a great store experience at a Whole Foods or at a Trader Joe's or at Kohl's, I will not expect a similar great experience at any other store environment that I go to. Why should that be any different?
I'm curious to get your take on this because, right, the positive ways, if you have a great experience, you will expect that everywhere, and as you should. But separately, I've seen a lot, and this is probably more common on the B2B side, even when you have a bad workflow or a bad experience, and there's a better option there, but it requires a change in how you do something.
Sure.
People get very used to that kind of, this is how I do this. And this is something, it's interesting, something we've run into here is like, so I don't know how familiar you are with what we do at LogRocket, but basically we start out doing session replay, but we do basically AI agents that watch it for you. We have,
Right.
agents that kind of read all the feedback. And the idea is you don't ever have to watch them. It tells you what's important. And I talk to users a lot and run
Right.
into people going, oh, I use it to search and to find things that I've heard about from other people and go look at what happened. I'm like, no, you don't need to do that. Like that's the entire point. But because
Exactly.
that's the workflow, and they bought it for the proactive, but it's just the workflow that people get. And so it's interesting to see, like, you get locked in, and when it's a great workflow, you expect that everywhere. When it's a mid workflow, you still kind of expect that everywhere. And breaking that habit of people is really, really hard.
Exactly.
Now imagine if it's really positive, now you have double reinforced.
Absolutely. So whether it's B2C or B2B, that aspect of product-led growth, which is one, I'm, trying to remove friction as much as possible. But second is, I do not want to re-educate you so that you can, you have to reinvent that wheel or sort of relearn something. I want to leverage what you intuitively know so that it becomes easier for you to use my product.
And maybe this is a good story because one of the major places you've been, you spent almost a decade at Amazon, right?
7+ years, 7.5 years at Amazon.
And so you did a lot there, but one thing I found really interesting is you actually had a part in what is a major workflow for hundreds of millions of people, the actual homepage, right?
Right. Yes.
So let's dig into that because I think there's an interesting story there of like, how do you make these changes and add to positively to this kind of like workflow and how do you help people have a great experience, but also improve, the bottom line for the company and everything. So you can add to both. You can have positive outcomes on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah, absolutely. This story is very interesting. And what was my most sort of, I would say, peak experience at Amazon, doing something at scale and then launching it and scaling it globally. This story is really interesting because this talks to both Amazon's philosophy of what Amazon wanted to do on the homepage, but also how it wanted to be customer backwards at the same time.
What does customer backwards mean, first of all, for people who might not?
Yeah, customer backwards really is, you start from the customer and then work backwards of that for anything that you want to solve for, right? Instead of saying, hey, I have an idea and I want to do this, which is solution forward. The problem there is if you already have an idea, then you're already, sort of tied to it, you're wedded to it in some sense, and your ability to look for other ways of achieving the same outcome could be limited. Whereas when you start from a customer and work backwards of that, then you are in some sense, solution agnostic. You're trying to figure out the best way of solving that customer's problem and therefore customer backwards.
And I love that because I think it's a very Amazon thing, but clearly, I mean, maybe something more people should, mimic is if the customer has a good experience and is able to get what they want and feels good about it, it's probably be good for the business long term. So how did this work from that standpoint? Like what was the customer goal, I guess you guys were working at that?
So on the Amazon's homepage, you would find a rotating carousel, which Amazon used to call the hero. Most e-commerce experiences would have something very similar or a version of it, right? Now, Amazon's thinking then was we wanted to use the hero, which was the number one placement on Amazon, right? The third most visited website in the world, the number one placement there, almost like a waterfront property to drive what Amazon called the big bets, right? So Alexa, Kindle, or Amazon Prime, or music, or pharmacy, or grocery, all of those programs had sort of an allocation on that placement. Now, the challenge was that each of those programs had their own metrics, and they were trying to optimize for their own business in some sense. So Alexa was optimizing for units, Prime was optimizing for subscription, music was optimizing for podcast and streaming, and grocery was optimizing for getting customers adopted into the grocery behavior on Amazon, which is not the first place you go to when you want to buy grocery, right? And the challenge really was that. So in some sense, different businesses trying to apply different rules and different metrics and different optimizations. But in a way, that was becoming not customer backwards because we were not starting from what the customer wanted to see in that placement. We were starting from what we wanted the customers to see there, which is Amazon's big bets. The other challenge there also was some sort of an overexposure. And now this is fairly easy for you to understand if you sort of look at, watching a television advertisement, for example, right? So first time you watch it, you might, see it, you might not see it, you might get interested maybe a little bit. Second time, there is some hook, third time you get the message probably. But if I show you the same message, the same ad, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, what I'm doing is one, I'm wasting money. And at some point, you've already started not paying attention to it, right? And if you keep doing that again and again, that really drives a bad experience with the customer. So we were sort of seeing some of that on the homepage as well, where overexposure to these programs was causing what we called as hero blindness. So customers were ignoring parts of those. So what we really did was we did three things. We looked at the policy, which is eligibility and exposure caps. What we then looked for was measurement. So we solved for common measurement across all of these programs. So irrespective of whether it is advertising or Alexa devices, or we are looking at Prime subscriptions, all of those programs have brought them to a common set of metrics or a common set of measurement across perception building, habit driving, and economic impact. And then what we did was we put some governance into it in terms of defining what really a campaign means, because different teams have different definitions of a campaign. What does a creative mean? What does exposure mean? And then put guardrails so that no one program can take a bunch of the exposure, but we do it in a way that is customer backwards, because once we start seeing signals from the customers, if they are engaging or not engaging with that program, then we show them something else, which is the next best action or the next best program that they could look at. So in some sense, we really started looking at it from a customer perspective, but we really tied that to the business impact as well. The net effect was we reclaimed some 41% impressions that were wasted because of overexposure. That led to hundreds of millions of dollars of incremental business impact for all of these programs.
So how were you able to kind of come to an understanding of what the customer was looking for there, or how did that work to kind of figure out what they wanted and what was working, what wasn't? Was it people clicking on stuff? Was it, signing up for Prime Video or something? How did you kind of discern those things?
So one, we started with a lot of experimentation. Actually, we ran about 20 plus experiments in 5 or 6 countries across different programs to really understand what that placement was good at and what it was not good at. Right. So we sort of understood that this placement was great at driving perceptions, but maybe not so great at driving lower funnel metrics. So experimentation obviously gave a lot of those insights. We also looked at, like I said, the exposure limits as well. So data told us that there was obviously a very clear point of diminishing returns from impressions, right? Showing the same content, the same program beyond a certain number was actually flattening the incremental impact curve. And in some sense, actually driving the customers away from that program. So it was actually, harmful more than being useful. So we looked at some of that data and then, modeled a few things again to see what customers are looking at. But in terms of your question on what metrics did we look at, we really created that trifecta of metrics across. Does it impact perceptions that we care about for that program? Does it build habits and drive long-term adoption for that program, not just a short-term click or a short-term purchase? And does it drive an economic impact, which Amazon measures in terms of free cash flow, not just revenue today, but what is the free cash flow of you doing something on Amazon 1 year from now, 2 years from now, etc.
So would you look at it from a standpoint of, continuing to use Prime Video as an example? I don't know if that's a good example. So if
Very
not,
good. It's an excellent example.
Is it like looking at, you show a number of impressions and down the line, they have a higher rate of subscribing to Prime Video, or am I looking at that wrong there?
Then you are looking at that very correctly. But the one step that we would look at incrementally was, are they just sort of streaming on Prime Video, or are they streaming on Prime Video to an extent that then defines the adoption into that behavior? So for example, if you go stream on Prime Video today for 1 minute after watching something on, say, Amazon, maybe Amazon has a new show and that's exciting, and you go stream and you watch the trailer, that's great. At least I got you to sort of, do that action on a different screen, on a different device. But that is not going to get you adopted into Prime Video as a program, right? So every team, every program defines what adoption means for them. So adoption for a Prime Video or a Netflix could mean that you stream at least 3 shows for 30 minutes each in a period of 1 month, right? That's where you start getting hooked onto that program or hooked onto that platform, and then you come back again and again. Adoption for a grocery program could mean you shop at least maybe 6 times in a period of 3 months. But if you just shop once or twice, yes, that's interesting, but that does not get you really hooked onto that program or that behavior. So what we care about is not the one action or the first action. First action is great, but what we care about is, does that get you enough into being engaged into that program so that you're adopted? So we can then stop pushing that content or that creative to you and then get you onto some other program.
I think that's so important into how do you define success and how do you really double down on things that work? Because if you don't have that specificity, you're just going to chase. You may go, oh, this person, if you just have a point action, this person, we want them to stream.
Yes.
Well, they streamed a trailer.
Right.
Who gives a care, right?
Yeah.
I guess looking at that, you start to get into, at a certain point, showing them more, they're just not going to do it. So you're just throwing good resources after bad. Was that more what you saw? Do you think that's where you started to see more impressions hurt it? It hurt the intention is just they were never going to do it? Or did it actually cause them to not want to be video customers in that case?
So it's a couple of reasons actually. And the way I term this is, making sure your content, whichever the surface is action aware from the customer. So there could be examples of that the customer is already streaming Prime Video, right? But we continue to show the content. So, we haven't really captured the action from the customer and really realizing that, hey, the customer is already hooked onto this. So either I move the customer to a new program, or I change the content to this customer in a way that is personalized to where the customer is in that particular journey. So one could be from there. The second could be saying, hey, you already seen, n number of campaigns or creatives or whatever you want to call it from Prime Video, and you are just not engaging with it. Therefore, you have already given me some signals that you may not be engaging with this program. So either I figure out another way of reaching out to you, right? Maybe the content is not working, so I experiment with a different content or content type. Maybe the program that I was promoting or the series that I was promoting was not to your liking, and therefore you did not engage. And maybe I could then figure out if there's a better way or different way to reach out to you. Or third could be that, you just are not going to engage with that, and therefore I should stop showing that to you, right? So just really understand the customer signals and then adapting to it. So it really depends on the program or the business area they're looking at, but essentially being customer backwards or customer aware, one, and second, being action aware. So you are not really dragging the customer on the same journey. You're aware of where the customer is and helping the customer move forward in that journey, right?
It's such an interesting point where people could take that lesson from is you need to be aware of like where those cutoffs are, where you're just chasing bad after good, but you need to understand deeply, what are you trying to get the person to do? What does success look like? How do you not get a false positive they did the thing? And then where do you cut off the effort and move on? I love it. Like, and then, in this case, it's like what, $500 million in impact, which $500 million in impact, it seems
Right.
like, by just getting this stuff right for Amazon.
Exactly, because I'm not interested as an Amazon or as a Kohl's or well as an enterprise in selling you one stuff, right?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm trying to serve you best based on your interests and preferences. And if you are giving me signals in terms of what those preferences are or are not,
Mhm.
then I am in that sense product agnostic, right?
Yeah.
I want to get you engaged into that platform, not force you to buy one product or one type of service.
All right. We're going to do a take two here because we had some technical difficulties and our podcast platform kind of went to sleep on us for a day or so. So we're back, but I wanted to make sure we cover this because this is a huge part of what I wanted to talk to you about. So, we'll just dive right into it. But, you spent a lot of time at Amazon. A good portion of that was testing and driving forward and how do you improve the experience for the customers. But a good
Mhm.
portion of that was also thinking about the future of retail, right? And
Right.
so we are obviously in the middle of inarguably a huge shift in how things are going to work with the rise and spread of AI. How does AI start to affect retail on both ends of the spectrum, right? There's both the tech native retailers, but there's also the traditional ones that are
Right.
moving more and more. Like, what does that future look like? And do they converge? Do we start to see differences in how these companies move? And what is just the general future of retail look like?
No conversation is complete without talking AI. So I'll share my perspective and my observations. I could be wrong, but this is really where I have drawn some of my learnings from. Most AI conversations start with, which tool should I buy, or what is our AI roadmap, or what is the coolest AI tool I encountered last week, or are we in an AI hype or an AI bubble, etc. Those are all interesting questions. But for me, the better question really is, how should our business work differently in an AI world, right? For me, tools are replaceable. Business models, how you create and capture value is really what compounds. So I'm looking at this in a very tool agnostic way, if you can sort of term it that. What I would actually encourage anybody who's looking at this was to really look at the business model canvas and draw two columns, one without AI and one with AI. And in the AI version, you can go box by box to really say what really changes in this new AI world. Let's look at an example, right? So let's say value proposition. In an AI world, you can personalize a lot. So the question I would ask therefore is, what new promises become possible when experiences are far more personalized? They are more predictive, they are more conversational. So for example, can I now promise the customer, write for them bundles, right? Can I offer assisted shopping in a digital world, which was, either not possible or very difficult to do without AI or AI capabilities? Can I explain some of my options a little better to the customer and promote to them, for example, not just a product, but say an outfit, right? So those are really the questions I would ask. And I would really go point by point on the value prop, on the customer segments who I can now serve profitability, to the channels on how to search, email, in-store, etc. now change when I can capture that intent far more better in a natural language. My revenue streams, my cost structure, what gets sort of permanently cheaper with an AI world. Can I now bring down, for example, my contacts per order? Can I bring down my cost per acquisition, etc.? And those are really the questions to me that are more intuitive to a business lever, which is new revenue, high LTV, or low cost, and really stop working that isn't connected to any of these aspects of the business model changes.
It's an interesting perspective because I think kind of what you're getting at is the problem doesn't change.
Right.
Like retailers, you're trying to sell goods to consumers. And ideally, the more you can sell to them, the better off you're going to be. thinking about this, like to double click on it a little bit differently,
Mhm.
if you think about like a homepage, for instance, if I'm an e-commerce, practitioner, which we
Right.
have a lot who listen, like concretely, what are things I can start to test
Right.
around here that I couldn't do before?
The beauty is, with the customer journey sort of shrinking with AI agentic shopping, my homepage today is any surface. My homepage could be outside of my ecosystem or outside of my site. Maybe a ChatGPT sort of surface becomes my homepage, and that's really where the customer discovers me, my products. And if I have the integration on checkout, could actually, buy from ChatGPT itself and never come to my website, right? So you got to also think differently about, what your surfaces today are and not just rely on the existing surfaces in a pre-AI world.
That brings up a really good point because like there is one is right, you can personalize better on site. If you have people who are logged in or whatever, they can come and you can have a profile
Right.
for them. But yeah, there's the other piece, which is one, agentic shopping, modules that will come and shop for you, or two, given where a lot of the models are moving and a lot of the companies are moving,
Right.
now you can just check out on ChatGPT. Like, how does that change if I'm a retailer? How do I need to think about changing that? Like, I don't control the experience anymore. To me, that would be terrifying. Like, is that right? Should I be scared as hell, or is this a good thing?
No, I think you're going to be excited about it because there's so much you can do more on a new surface in a very different way, right? The way I think about this is, let's take an example of search, right? In a traditional e-commerce search, the customer has to exactly know what they're searching for. So in some sense, you're asking the customer to type in an answer by saying, for example, I need a red party dress. And that's when you would sort of look at that intent and show the customer options of red party dress or maybe some other options that go along with it, etc. But in an agentic search, for example, it allows the customer to state their problem and their context, right? The customer, for example, say, hey, I'm going to a party. I already have these 4 varieties of dress. I do not want to repeat those patterns. I have wore them earlier. The party is going to have X, Y, and Z from my office, some of my friends. This is what I want to show up like. And therefore, really capture the intent, which is the question, not the answer. And let the agentic search, therefore, sort of, help the customer really find what is most appropriate for that context. So for me, when the experience changes, right? So from having the customer really know exactly what they're searching for to helping the customer start with their problem and their context and intent is a very different way of serving the customer's intent in that sense.
One piece I just want to kind of dig into here is like thinking through, what we're just talking about there, where ostensibly the person could be, it goes from right, like I do look great in a red party dress, I'll be
Right,
honest. But the difference being rather than maybe I have a retailer or two who I generally am loyal to or just used to shopping at.
right.
Historically, my move would have been go to their site, look through and see what red party dresses they have.
Yeah,
I'd probably pick one of those. But now, does it start to open up maybe a world where more retailers can get different share than they used to? Because now I can just say, hey, like what Gemini now has person data, so it knows my calendar and all that kind of stuff. I can just say, hey, I need an outfit to wear to this event coming up on my calendar. And
right.
it can go do the, shopping deep dive and come back and say, here, looking at that and knowing your preferences from past shopping and what you like, what you don't like. Here's 5 options I put together. And it may
Exactly.
be retail agnostic. It might be an outfit from like 3 different retailers. What does that mean for kind of established retailers versus up and coming? Is there a chance for people who maybe aren't as big to get a shot in the arm of growth?
No, absolutely. I think it plays very well for both. And to me, it actually has tilted the balance a little bit in terms of the retailers who were
Mhm.
difficult to discover otherwise in a very traditional Google search, right? So, for example, retailers with a long tail of products, right, which were difficult to discover otherwise, that because those products would not get a lot of traffic,
Mhm.
right? But in an agentic world or an agentic search world, because you're capturing the customer's intent, and because of the way those agents will actually go and research some of the sources, not just look at keywords or not just look at traffic data, etc., allows you to now surface products that otherwise would have been difficult to discover, right? So Etsy, for example, in terms of what they're doing, or any other retailer with a very long tail, difficult to discover, now I think has a better chance of getting discovered in that sort of a scenario.
So I guess let's go to the data side. Like, how do I think about this from are there things I need to be doing on a data setup or data cleanliness, both to enable myself to do as a retailer, the smart personalization that, but also to take advantage of this move in AI. I assume there's things I can do wrong where I'm not going to be discovered in it. And then there's also things I need to do on the data personalization side for people who are on my site or maybe, even interfacing through an MCP server or some kind of agentic commerce flow.
Exactly. Now my perspective on this, and not a new perspective, some other people have also said it, but from my experience, AI needs actually containers before it needs any models. And what I mean by that is, let me give you an example. So global trade did not scale because ships got faster. It scaled because everybody agreed to the same context or the same standard, which is the shipping container. So the one standard box really made handouts predictable across ports, across trucks, across rails, across insurance companies who could now standardize their insurance rate because they could now know the risk, across freight companies who could now standardize their rates because they exactly know what they were carrying and the volumetric rate of that. What increased really was the reliability enabled in just-in-time systems and risk management, and the power really shifted to orchestrators who engineered the whole network, right? Yes, standardization of the box made it possible, but everything, the whole system, then sort of reinvented itself around that box. So the ports, the trucks, the rails, the shipping containers, the ships themselves, the sizes of them, the cranes on the ports, the automation of that, everything was working around that box. So to me, I'm using the same analogy, which is AI needs the same thing, which is containerization for data. Now, if your product data, your customer data, your event data, your supply chain data, sits in different systems, or CMS, a CRM, a CDP, or an RMN, you don't have an AI strategy. You just have a translation deck. What we need to therefore create or start with in this context, therefore, is to create these dependable boxes, which is schemas, ontologies, and APIs, where AI could infer them from messy inputs and really have the same standard input for every system, irrespective of whether they are on-site or off-site. Now, that level of standardization of data is really what is going to make it possible for retailers, both large and small, to really play well and win in that AI world.
I guess how important is it as a maybe smaller retailer for me to figure out how to best box up and containerize my data about the product versus just having it available on the site somewhat intelligently and just having it there, right? It seems like realistically an AI should probably be able to go understand the data there, whether or not it's perfectly formatted the same across both those things.
Right. So may not show exactly similar on different surfaces, but I'm talking about more about the underlying data, not necessarily how it really shows up. So that's one. Second is, yes, it really matters that you have standardized containers because other agents were going to search for your resources. They're going to make their decisions about whether your content or your data or your product is relevant to the customer's intent in sub-milliseconds. If you're going to have a messy data, you're just going to add latency to that AI agent's work, and therefore increase the chances that your product may not get picked up or surface in that particular search for that particular intent. So when I mean standardization of data, I just don't mean in terms of having the right data attributes. So let's take, for example, a product container for an e-commerce, right? So you would have containers typically, even today, like attributes of size and color, or you could have attributes around truth in time, which is price, your availability, your delivery ETA, or you could have signals like reviews and customer ratings and returns. But more importantly, what you need to add to those today is relationships, which is this product is similar to some other product, or this product is best used for this product, or this product has the best use case, or customers find it most useful in this particular weather or this particular context, etc. And add some constraints around that. For example, saying, hey, this is the top 20 to 30% product categories where I can add some sort of an intent, which is, for example, saying, back to school laptop under $400 for a 10 to 13-year-old. But the moment I start to layer relationships between my products, not just the attributes, and also some level of intent, what that does, it makes it possible for my product, therefore, to be able to be searchable or being able to be discovered in an agentic search much faster, much better, because I'm now talking to the intent of the customer, not just the attributes. When I was doing search in a keyword search era, attributes mattered. When I'm trying to match the customer's intent, I need to go beyond just the attributes.
I ask about that because, I have a background in marketing, and one of the things that always really bothered me about Google and just search in general and kind of how we discovered things in the world that we've lived in for a couple of decades at this point was, sure, search could be a great democratizer, but
Right.
in reality, a lot of small businesses had great product, something that end users could really, really benefit from, but they weren't big enough to have a search person. And as search got more and more and more complex, it started to be, you needed all these technical structures on your site, or you need to do certain things. And you think about like the small business where you're maybe one or two clothing designers, a production person, like a 5-person company. There's just no world you were losing because you had great product, but just you weren't formatted the correct technical way for Google.
Yes.
And it seems like this is a chance to kind of solve that problem and give that small business a chance to compete at the same level as an Amazon, because the AI can parse that data without it having to be magically structured in the exact way the robot requires. But I guess, the counterpoint to that probably is, at some level, these are still for-profit companies that are running the AIs. They want to spend as little money getting you the right answer as possible. And so if you have it structured in the right way and they can discover it easier, right, to your point, the latency is lower. They have to spend less token and less compute parsing the data. Maybe they start to lean that way anyway, and it kind of erases that advantage. But it seems like that'd be a nice world.
Exactly. This is not just the same as SEO, where you have a certain structure on your site and you sort of add the right words, etc. It's really, to me, about whether you understand the context that your product is going to be used, you understand the customer segment or the customer type that's going to prefer your product, and whether you can match what you're putting there out in terms of the content or whatever to match the intent. Right? The more you do that, to me, that really matters more, and the sort of standardization of data and the relationships of products, information, etc., more than it being structured in a particular way just because it suits how an engine is going to discover you. So to me, it actually benefits, I would say, even smaller retailers or retailers with long tail that wouldn't be able to pump in as much money in terms of standardizing their SEO practices, etc. To me, they sort of have a level playing field in an agentic search world. But again, we'll learn how that goes.
To your point, right? Like it's you just said, we'll learn how it goes. We're not there yet. So we're going to see, we'll have to see how it goes. But I think you hit on good points of it's evolving quickly. Don't kind of tie into one tool too fast, right? Focus on the problem, not the tooling. And then you hot swap the best tooling for it. And I like the idea that you had of capture how people are going to use it, capture those relationships. Because that's something, ostensibly, if the LLM is just able to parse and read right, you don't need to do all the technical structuring and get into like headers and metadata and stuff like that. If you can just tell the story well, it should be able to interpret that and like opens up a new world. But yeah, to your point, we're going to see. But Rahul, as much as I could go on talking about the future of e-commerce now for hours, I'm going to be completely honest, and it has been fantastic. I recognize you have to get back to stuff. I actually have a software company I run marketing at that I have to go back to. But this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on and talking through both the experience at Amazon, kind of how that grew, and looking at that in the future of retail here. If people want to reach out and kind of ask you more or just get in touch, is LinkedIn the best place to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Ping me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. I post there fairly regularly, not as frequently as I would want to, but yes, I'm fairly available on LinkedIn. Again, Jeff, thank you so much for having me. And this was a very enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on twice and helping us finish the second piece here. But it's great chatting, Rahul. Let's stay in touch and hope to have you on again.
Thank you so much. Great chatting. Enjoyed the conversation.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.